The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. We regret to inform you that Sergeant Michael Harrington has been declared killed in action. Sarah's world collapsed in the doorway of the suburban home they had purchased just 3 months before his deployment. Her fingers turned white against the paper as she slid down the wall, her screams silent, her throat unable to produce sound. The war had taken him, they said. A mission gone wrong, an explosion, remains unrecoverable. The folded flag they gave her at the memorial service was pristine, untouched by the dust of the battlefield that had supposedly claimed him. They told her he died a hero. Would it have been easier if they had told her the truth? 4,000 miles away, as Sarah crumpled to the floor of their home, Michael Harrington stood on unfamiliar soil, breathing air that wasn't meant to fill his lungs anymore. His hands that should have been ash and dust according to the official report, held a new passport with a new name. This was the first day of a life he had planned for months, meticulous in every detail except one. He had not accounted for the weight of becoming a ghost. They had met in college, Michael with his easy smile and ambitious plans, Sarah with her quiet determination and unwavering loyalty. Their first conversation happened in the university library during a finals week, when Sarah had claimed the last available table, and Michael had asked if they might share. She was studying literature. He was finishing an assignment for international business. He made her laugh despite her stress, and she found herself looking forward to seeing him the next day. 3 months of coffee dates and long walks around campus led to a first kiss beneath the oak tree outside the Humanities building. Sarah remembered the way the setting sun had filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light across Michael's face. "I think I could fall in love with you," he had said, with a directness that both frightened and thrilled her. Their courtship had been swift but certain. Michael approached relationships the way he approached everything, with confidence and a clear vision of what he wanted. Sarah, more cautious by nature, found herself swept along by his certainty. When he proposed on graduation day, kneeling before her in his cap and gown, surrounded by cheering classmates, she had said yes without hesitation. The early years of marriage had been sweet, if sometimes strained by Michael's ambition. He wanted success, recognition, advancement. Sarah wanted a home, stability, connection. They compromised, as couples do. He took a position at an international consulting firm that allowed him to be home most weekends. She taught high school English and created the warm environment he returned to. They balanced each other, his restless energy and her grounding presence. "We'll have it all," Michael used to say, mapping out their future on lazy Sunday mornings. The career, the house, the family, the adventures. "Just trust me." And Sarah did trust him, completely and without reservation. She believed in the future he described with such conviction. The decision to enlist had come as a shock. Michael had never expressed interest in military service before, but suddenly, at 32, he spoke of duty and purpose with an intensity Sarah couldn't quite understand. The country had been at war for years. Perhaps he had finally felt compelled to contribute. She had argued, pleaded, tried to reason with him. They had plans, a mortgage, talks of starting a family soon. "It's something I need to do," was all he would say, his expression more resolved than she had ever seen it. 2 years, Sarah, then we'll have the rest of our lives." She had relented, not because she agreed, but because the alternative was losing him to a decision he seemed determined to make, with or without her support. Their last 6 months together before deployment had been a strange mix of tenderness and distance. Michael seemed both more attentive than ever, and somehow already absent. He would hold her for hours at night, whispering about how much he would miss her, then spend days distracted and unreachable, lost in preparations and paperwork. The night before he left, they had made love with a desperate intensity. "Remember me like this," he had whispered against her skin. At the time, she thought he meant in case of death. Later, she would understand it was his farewell, composed and delivered while looking directly into her eyes. The photograph on their bedside table captured them in happier times, hiking in Colorado, mountains rising behind them, Michael's arm around Sarah's waist, both squinting against the sun. Sarah would keep that image as the last perfect moment, unaware that photographs can lie just as easily as people. Have you ever looked back at a memory and wondered how much of it was real? The first year passed in a fog of sympathy casseroles and support group meetings. "You're so strong," they said, not seeing how she would sit in his closet at night, face buried in his shirts, searching for a scent that was already fading. His absence was a physical thing, taking up space in their home, sitting across from her at dinner, lying next to her in bed. Sarah's grief followed a pattern familiar to those who have experienced sudden traumatic loss. The initial shock protected her for weeks, a numbness that allowed her to make it through the memorial service, to accept condolences with mechanical gratitude, to sign the necessary paperwork. His body hadn't been recovered. There would be no traditional burial. The military had provided a flag-draped casket filled with mementos for the service, his dress uniform, photographs, letters she had written him. She had placed a single white rose atop it before they lowered the empty box into the ground. When the shock subsided, pain rushed in to fill the void. Physical pain that doubled her over in the grocery store when she automatically reached for his favorite cereal. Pain that woke her at 3 a.m., gasping and clutching at the empty space beside her. Pain that made simple tasks like showering or making dinner seem insurmountable. Michael's parents, Robert and Eleanor, grieved differently. Robert, a Vietnam veteran himself, maintained the stoic exterior expected of military men. He spoke of sacrifice and honor, his back straight and his voice steady, even as his eyes betrayed a deeper suffering. Eleanor collapsed inward, aged 10 years in a matter of months. She called Sarah daily at first, then weekly. Their conversations, circular explorations of the same unanswerable questions. Had he suffered? What had his last thoughts been? Would the pain ever lessen? Sarah joined a support group for military widows and widowers, sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement, listening to stories that mirrored her own. There was comfort in the shared experience, in not having to explain the particular texture of this grief. The group leader, a woman who had lost her husband 5 years earlier, promised them all that it would get easier. Not better, she clarified. Never better, but easier to carry. Sarah wasn't sure she believed her. How could something this heavy ever become manageable? She returned to teaching 6 months after the telegram, pushed by financial necessity and the gentle insistence of friends who worried about her isolation. Standing before a classroom of teenagers discussing Romeo and Juliet, she felt like an imposter. How could she discuss fictional tragedy when her own life had been shattered? But gradually, the routine provided structure to days that had previously stretched formless before her. Her colleagues were kind but awkward, never quite knowing what to say. They invited her to happy hours and holiday parties, which she declined more often than not. Her friend Amanda, who taught history in the classroom next door, was the exception. Persistent in her support, refusing to be pushed away, bringing lunch to share during breaks, and occasionally showing up at Sarah's door with dinner and a movie. "It gets easier," Amanda promised, echoing the support group leader. They were wrong. Nights were the worst. Sarah developed insomnia, spending hours staring at the ceiling, replaying memories. She imagined conversations with Michael, arguments and reconciliations that would never happen. Sometimes she thought she felt the mattress dip beside her, a phantom presence that disappeared when she reached for it. She tried sleeping on the couch, but the emptiness followed her there too. She tried sleeping pills, which left her groggy and disconnected. Eventually, she settled into a pattern of fragmented rest, punctuated by vivid dreams from which she would wake calling his name. The first anniversary of Michael's death arrived with the weight of ritual. Sarah visited the empty grave, placed white lilies against the cold stone, traced his name with her fingers. Robert and Eleanor joined her, the three of them standing in silence before retreating to the Harringtons' home to share memories over a meal none of them could eat. "He would want you to be happy," Eleanor said, as Sarah prepared to leave, the platitude falling flat between them. What did it matter what he would want? He was gone. Have you ever measured time by the absence of someone? 3 years after the telegram, Sarah finally packed his clothes. Not to donate, she couldn't bear the thought of strangers wearing them, but to store in the attic in carefully labeled boxes. She kept a few items: his favorite sweater, soft with wear, the tie he had worn at their wedding, a flannel shirt that still improbably held a trace of his scent. The act of packing felt both like betrayal and progress. His closet, no longer a shrine, became just a closet again. The sight of it didn't pierce her each morning, though the empty hangers had their own accusatory presence. Sarah had settled into what she called functional grief. She worked, paid bills, occasionally saw friends, even laughed sometimes. From the outside, she appeared to be healing. Inside, she carried her loss like a stone in her chest, present in every breath, but no longer preventing her from breathing. It was during this 3rd year that the first strange thing happened. A credit alert for a card application she hadn't made. A glitch, the bank assured her. Identity theft was common. She changed her passwords and thought nothing more of it. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a call from a collection agency about an overdue payment for a rental property in Oregon. She had never been to Oregon, let alone rented property there. The agent apologized for the mix-up when she explained, but something about the incident left her unsettled. Then came the email to her personal account. No subject line, no text, just an attachment she was afraid to open. She scanned it for viruses, finding none, but when she finally clicked, her screen remained blank. A technical error, perhaps. But why did it feel like a message, like someone reaching across a void, testing the waters? Sarah mentioned these occurrences to Amanda over coffee. "Sounds like standard identity theft attempts," her friend said, reasonable and reassuring. "My cousin had her credit card number stolen 3 times last year. It's just the world we live in now." Sarah nodded, willing herself to believe the logical explanation. But doubt had taken root, a small seed that would grow in the dark corners of her mind. In the 4th year, Sarah dated for the first time. David was a science teacher at her school, kind and patient and understanding of her past. He didn't rush her, didn't expect her to be anything other than who she was, a woman still tangled in grief, still learning how to exist in the world alone. Their 3rd date ended with her sobbing in the restaurant bathroom, overwhelmed by guilt that felt both irrational and insurmountable. David waited outside, then drove her home in compassionate silence. He called the next day, not to continue their romantic relationship, but to offer friendship instead. Sarah accepted gratefully, relieved to have the pressure of romance removed while keeping his gentle presence in her life. 5 years after Michael's death, Sarah joined Amanda on a trip to Florida, her first vacation since losing him. They rented a small beach house, spent days by the ocean, drank wine on the porch at night. It was during this trip that Sarah realized she had gone several hours without thinking of Michael. The realization brought fresh grief, as though she were losing him again by beginning to let go. "It's not forgetting," Amanda assured her, refilling their glasses as they watched the tide roll in. "It's just continuing." Sarah nodded, though the distinction felt meaningless. Continuing without him still meant he was gone. The 6th year brought more strange occurrences. Sarah's mail began arriving opened, or not at all. When she reported it to the post office, they suggested it might be neighborhood kids, or a processing error. She changed her mailing address to a P.O. box, unwilling to dismiss her unease. Then came the phone call. Heavy breathing, then nothing. The number untraceable. 3 nights in a row, always at 2:17 a.m. The police said it was probably teenagers, but Sarah felt something cold and certain settle in her stomach. The calls stopped as suddenly as they began. Sarah began to look over her shoulder more often, to check the locks twice before bed. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though she saw no one. Friends attributed her anxiety to the approaching anniversary, to the trauma that still lived within her. She let them believe this explanation, unable to articulate the difference between old grief and new fear. 6 years after the telegram, Sarah stopped wearing her wedding ring, but kept it on a chain around her neck. The chain grew heavy with time, but removing it felt like a betrayal of something sacred. She still lived in their house, surrounded by memories that had softened from acute pain to a persistent ache. She began volunteering at a veterans center, finding purpose in helping others who had experienced loss similar to her own. Through this work, she met Jason, a former Marine who had lost his leg in the same conflict that had taken Michael. They shared an understanding that required no explanation, a shorthand of grief that made communication easier. Their friendship evolved slowly into something more, neither of them rushing to label what was developing between them. Sarah spent Christmas with Jason and his family, welcomed by his parents and siblings, with a warmth that reminded her how long she had been cold. When Jason first kissed her on New Year's Eve as fireworks exploded overhead, Sarah felt both thrill and terror. To open herself to love again was to risk loss again. But Jason, who understood risk better than most, didn't press for more than she could give. "We take it day by day," he told her, his hand steady around hers. "That's all any of us can do." For a while, it seemed like Sarah might finally be moving forward, building something new from the wreckage of her past. But as winter melted into spring, the strange occurrences intensified, as though triggered by her tentative happiness. Would you recognize a warning if it came disguised as coincidence? The 7th year after Michael's disappearance brought a series of disturbing incidents that Sarah could no longer dismiss as coincidence or paranoia. Someone had been in her house. She was certain of it, though nothing obvious was missing. Small things were out of place. A photograph moved from the mantel to the bookshelf, her reading glasses, which she always left by the bed, found in the kitchen, Michael's watch kept in her jewelry box, suddenly on the bathroom counter. When she reported the break-in to the police, they found no signs of forced entry. "Are you sure you didn't move these things yourself?" the officer asked, his tone gentle but skeptical. Sometimes grief can affect memory. Sarah knew she wasn't imagining things, wasn't losing her mind, despite how convenient that explanation would be for everyone around her. She changed the locks, installed a security system, and began keeping a detailed journal of anything unusual. Jason, concerned by her growing anxiety, suggested she spend some time at his place. "Just until you feel safe again," he said. Sarah agreed, temporarily moving a few essentials to his apartment across town. The change of environment helped. The strange occurrences stopped, or at least weren't following her to this new location. Their relationship deepened during this time of shared space. Jason's steady presence and uncomplicated affection began to heal something in Sarah that she had thought permanently broken. She found herself laughing more often, making plans for the future, allowing herself to imagine a life beyond perpetual mourning. But her feelings for Jason, genuine though they were, existed alongside her unresolved grief for Michael. She couldn't give herself fully to this new relationship, while questions about her past remained unanswered. "I need to go back to my house," she told Jason after 3 weeks at his apartment. "I can't keep running from whatever this is." "Then we face it together," he said, his hand finding hers across the kitchen table. "I'm with you, Sarah." They returned to her house together, finding it undisturbed. For several days, nothing unusual happened. Sarah began to wonder if her absence had discouraged whatever or whoever had been intruding on her life. Perhaps it had been a random stalker, now moved on to another target. Then came the photograph. Sarah was cleaning out a rarely used desk drawer when she found it, a Polaroid she had never seen before. showing a beach she didn't recognize and the back of a man who looked impossibly like Michael. The photo was recent. The buildings in the background were modern. The cars parked nearby were current models. The date stamp in the corner read 05/17/2021, 7 years after Michael had supposedly died. Her hands trembled as she showed the photograph to Jason. "This wasn't here before," she said, watching his face carefully. "And look at the date. This can't be real." Jason studied the image, his expression transitioning from confusion to concern. "You think this is Michael?" he asked cautiously. "Sarah, it could be anyone. You can't even see his face." "I know my husband," she said, the words coming out more sharply than intended. "I know his build, his posture, the way he holds himself. That's him, Jason." "Even if it is," Jason said, choosing his words carefully, "that would mean—" He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. That would mean Michael had faked his death. That would mean 7 years of grief had been unnecessary, unwarranted. That would mean their entire relationship had been built on a lie. Sarah began to shake, a bone-deep tremor that wouldn't stop. Jason wrapped his arms around her, holding her together as reality splintered around them. "We need more information," he said finally, his military training asserting itself in crisis. "This could be some sick prank. We shouldn't jump to conclusions." But in her heart, Sarah already knew. The strange occurrences, the sense of being watched, the unsettling coincidences, they all formed a pattern she had been refusing to see. Michael was alive, and for reasons she couldn't begin to comprehend, he wanted her to know it. The hope that flickered to life within her was painful in its intensity. If Michael was alive, where had he been all this time? Why had he let her believe he was dead? Was he in trouble, being held against his will? Or had he chosen to leave her, to orchestrate this elaborate disappearance? "I need to find him," she said, pulling away from Jason's embrace. "I need to know the truth." Jason's face reflected a complex mix of emotions: concern for her, fear of losing her, understanding of her need for closure. "Whatever you decide," he said finally, "I'm here. But Sarah, be prepared. The truth might not be what you're hoping for." She nodded, unable to voice the fear that had taken root alongside hope. What if Michael had simply wanted to escape their life together? What if all her grief had been for nothing more than a man's desire for freedom? Would you pursue a truth that might destroy everything you thought you knew? Sarah's search for answers began methodically. She couldn't go to the authorities. What would she say? That she suspected her legally dead husband was actually alive based on a mysterious Polaroid. They would attribute it to grief, to denial, to psychological breakdown. She needed more proof before involving official channels. She started by revisiting Michael's personal effects, boxes she had packed away years ago. Financial records, old passports, their marriage certificate, his birth certificate. She spread the documents across the dining room table, looking for something, anything, that might hint at his plans or current whereabouts. Jason helped, taking a week off work to assist with her investigation. Together they combed through bank statements from the months before Michael's deployment, looking for unusual transactions or withdrawals. They found several large sums moved to accounts Sarah didn't recognize, investments liquidated without explanation. "Did you know about these?" Jason asked, pointing to a withdrawal of $50,000 made 3 weeks before Michael left for his tour. Sarah shook her head. They had maintained some financial separation. Michael had handled investments while she managed their household accounts. She had trusted him implicitly, never questioning his decisions. Now that trust seemed like willful blindness. They contacted the banks, but accounts had been closed or transferred years ago. The trail had gone cold, deliberately obscured by time and legal barriers. Next, Sarah reached out to Michael's old friends, carefully framing her questions as part of a memoir project to honor his memory. Most conversations yielded nothing useful. Generic remembrances, expressions of continued sympathy. But when she spoke with Tom Campbell, Michael's college roommate and best man at their wedding, she detected hesitation in his responses. Tom, she said, abandoning pretense, I need to know if Michael ever talked to you about leaving, about starting over somewhere else. The long silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah, Tom finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, I can't be involved in this. I have a family now. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly I am. But I can't help you. He hung up before she could press further, but his non-answer confirmed her growing suspicion. Michael's disappearance had been planned, and at least some of his friends had known about it. The betrayal cut deeper than she had imagined possible. Not just Michael, but their shared circle of friends. People who had attended her husband's memorial service, who had hugged her and offered condolences while knowing he wasn't actually dead. We need professional help, Jason said after a week of dead ends. Someone who knows how to track people who don't want to be found. Sarah was reluctant to involve strangers in something so personal, so potentially explosive. But Jason was right. They had exhausted their amateur investigative abilities. Using some of his military connections, Jason arranged a meeting with a private investigator who specialized in finding people who had deliberately disappeared. Meredith Chen operated out of a small office above a convenience store, her credentials impressive despite the modest surroundings. She listened without judgment as Sarah explained the situation, laying out the strange occurrences and the discovery of the photograph. This happens more often than you'd think, Meredith said when Sarah finished. People disappear for all kinds of reasons: debt, legal trouble, family problems, and yes, sometimes just to start over. The war provided perfect cover. Can you find him? Sarah asked. Meredith considered the photograph, the financial records, the timeline Sarah had constructed. I'll need more to go on, she said finally. Did your husband have any specific interests or skills that might indicate where he'd go or what he'd do? Any languages he spoke? Places he always wanted to visit? Sarah thought back to their conversations, to Michael's ambitious plans. He spoke Spanish fairly well, she said, and he always talked about living somewhere with a beach. He was in international business before enlisting. He had contacts all over Latin America. Meredith nodded, making notes. That gives us a starting point. Latin America is a popular destination for Americans wanting to disappear. Less extradition enforcement, cash economies, expatriate communities, where newcomers don't face too many questions. How long will this take? Jason asked, his hand finding Sarah's under the table. Hard to say, Meredith replied. If he's been careful, and it sounds like he has been, it could be weeks or months. Or we might get lucky and find a digital footprint tomorrow. I'll need a retainer to start. The amount she named would deplete most of Sarah's savings, money she had been carefully preserving since Michael's death. The irony wasn't lost on her, using the remains of their shared life to uncover his new one. Do it, Sarah said, writing a check without hesitation. The cost didn't matter anymore. Only the truth did. As Meredith began her investigation, Sarah's anxiety intensified. She jumped at unexpected noises, checked over her shoulder constantly, slept fitfully when she slept at all. Jason stayed with her most nights, his presence both comforting and complicated by the nature of their search. What will you do if we find him? He asked one night, the question hanging between them in the darkness. Sarah had asked herself the same thing countless times, but had no clear answer. I don't know, she admitted. I just need to understand why. Why he would do this to me, to his parents, to everyone who loved him. Jason didn't press for more, but Sarah felt the unspoken question. What about us? Would finding Michael mean losing what she had built with Jason? She couldn't answer that. Not yet. Not until she knew the full truth. Weeks passed with little progress. Meredith's updates were professional but sparse, leads being followed, contacts being made, databases being searched. Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine, teaching her classes and going through the motions of everyday life, while waiting for news that would either destroy or redeem her past. The 8th-year anniversary of Michael's death approached. Sarah debated whether to participate in the ritual she had established, the visit to the empty grave, dinner with his parents, the private moments of remembrance. It all felt hollow now, potentially farcical. But she couldn't explain her absence to Robert and Eleanor without revealing suspicions she wasn't yet ready to share. So she went through the motions, placing lilies on the grave, accepting Eleanor's tearful embrace, listening to Robert's stoic reflections. The weight of her secret knowledge made the day nearly unbearable. These people had suffered genuinely, were still suffering, while their son possibly lived a new life somewhere warm and distant. "You seem different," Eleanor said, as they cleared dishes after dinner. "More, I don't know, present, somehow." Sarah forced a smile. "Just trying to move forward," she said. "It's what Michael would want." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. The day after the anniversary, Meredith called. "I've got something," she said without preamble. "A possible location. Can you come to my office?" Sarah and Jason arrived within the hour. Meredith spread photographs across her desk. Surveillance images taken from a distance, grainy but unmistakable. Michael, older but recognizable, walking along a beachfront promenade. Michael entering a restaurant with a dark-haired woman. Michael playing with two small children in a park. "Montevideo, Uruguay," Meredith said. "He's going by the name David Torres. Owns a small import-export business. Married to Elena Vega, local woman for about 7 years. 2 children, a boy and a girl, ages 6 and 4. Each word was a physical blow. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing, her vision tunneling to the images before her. Michael, alive, happy, with a new family that had begun even before the first anniversary of his death. While she had been drowning in grief, visiting an empty grave, he had been building a completely new life. "How certain are you that this is him?" Jason asked, his arm supporting Sarah's waist. 99%, Meredith replied. "The physical match is clear. More importantly, I traced financial transfers from those accounts you identified to Uruguayan banks. He established his business there about 6 months after his supposed death. He was careful, but he left a trail. Everyone does." Sarah picked up one of the photographs. Michael with his children, a little girl on his shoulders, a boy clinging to his leg. His smile was carefree, genuine, the smile of a man without regrets. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Meredith leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what you want, Sarah. We could take this information to the authorities. Fake death insurance fraud is a serious crime. We could confront him directly, or, Sarah prompted, "or you could walk away. Know the truth, but let him keep his new life while you focus on yours." Meredith glanced meaningfully at Jason. Sometimes knowing is enough. Sarah stared at the photographs, at the face that had haunted her dreams for 8 years. "I need to see him," she said finally, "face to face. I need to hear him explain why." Jason's expression tightened, but he nodded. "Then we go to Uruguay." The decision made, events accelerated with dizzying speed. Passports were located, flights booked, accommodations arranged. Sarah took a leave of absence from teaching, citing family emergency. Jason arranged time off from his job. Within a week, they were on a plane to Montevideo, the photographs and Meredith's detailed report packed carefully in Sarah's carry-on. As the coastline of Uruguay came into view below them, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. After 8 years of uncertainty and grief, she was finally closing the distance between herself and the truth. Whatever awaited her in Montevideo, reconciliation, confrontation, or final closure, she would face it directly. The plane touched down, wheels connecting with solid ground. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing for whatever came next. There would be no retreat now, no more hiding from reality. She was ready to reclaim the truth of her own life, whatever the cost. Would you cross oceans to confront a ghost, knowing the encounter might destroy what remains of your heart? The hotel overlooked Montevideo's Rambla, the wide oceanfront boulevard that curved along the coastline. From their room on the 8th floor, Sarah and Jason could see the entire bay, ships coming and going from the busy port, locals and tourists strolling along the promenade. Somewhere in this city, Michael, now David, was living his new life, unaware that his past was about to collide with his present. According to Meredith's information, David Torres ran his import-export business from an office near the port. He lived with his family in a comfortable house in Carrasco, an upscale neighborhood about 20 minutes from the city center. His routine was predictable. Mornings at the office, lunch at one of several regular spots, home by 6 most days. His children attended an international school. His wife taught art classes at a local community center. Sarah and Jason spent the first day simply observing from a distance. They found the office building, noted its entrances and exits. They located 2 of the restaurants Michael frequented. They drove past his house once, a white stucco structure with bougainvillea climbing the walls and children's bicycles in the driveway. Seeing these concrete evidences of Michael's new life made everything painfully real. This wasn't a mistake or a bizarre coincidence. This was deliberate betrayal on a scale Sarah could barely comprehend. "We should have a plan," Jason said that evening as they picked at room service dinner on their balcony, "for approaching him, for what you want to say." Sarah nodded, though she had no idea what words could possibly address the magnitude of what Michael had done. What do you say to a husband who orchestrated his own death rather than simply asking for a divorce? What questions could capture 8 years of unnecessary grief? "I think I need to see him alone," she said finally. "At least at first." Jason's expression tightened, but he nodded. "I'll be nearby, just in case." The next morning, they positioned themselves at a cafe across from one of Michael's regular lunch spots, a small seafood restaurant facing the harbor. Sarah wore sunglasses and a scarf over her hair, though she doubted Michael would be watching for her. Why would he? She was part of a past he had discarded entirely. At 1:15, right on schedule, Michael appeared, walking briskly from the direction of his office. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Even at a distance, after 8 years, she would have known him anywhere. He moved with the same confidence, the same purposeful stride. His hair was shorter now, with touches of grey at the temples. He wore a light suit, appropriate for the climate, expensive, but not ostentatious. He looked happy, relaxed, unburdened. Sarah felt Jason tense beside her as Michael approached the restaurant. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to form words. This moment had dominated her thoughts for months. Now that it was here, she felt oddly detached, as though watching herself in a film. "I'll be right here," Jason promised as she stood, gathering her courage. Sarah crossed the street slowly, giving Michael time to enter the restaurant and be seated. Through the window, she saw him greeted warmly by staff, who clearly knew him as a regular. He was shown to a corner table, where he sat with his back to the entrance, a position Sarah knew he had always avoided in his previous life, his military training making him wary of unguarded approaches. That small detail, the way he now sat comfortably with his back exposed, crystallized everything for Sarah. This wasn't Michael Harrington with a new name. This was an entirely different person who had shed Michael Harrington like an outgrown skin. She entered the restaurant, declined the hostess's offer to seat her, and walked directly to his table. For a long moment, she simply stood there, watching him review the menu with the casual interest of a man whose biggest concern was whether to order the fish or the pasta. "Michael," she said finally. He froze, his body tensing in recognition before he slowly raised his head. His eyes, the same clear blue she remembered, widened in shock and something else. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. He glanced quickly around the restaurant, assessing exits, witnesses, options. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, the gesture of a man who had always known this day might come. "Sarah," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it, "you should sit down." She did, her legs no longer able to support her. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. Fine lines around his eyes, a scar on his jaw that hadn't been there before, a deep tan that spoke of years in the sun. But his eyes were unchanged, still capable of looking at her with an intensity that had once made her feel like the center of his universe. Now those eyes were wary, calculating, already planning whatever came next. "You're alive," she said, the absurdity of the statement hanging between them. His mouth twisted in what might have been an attempt at a smile. "Yes. 8 years, Michael. 8 years I thought you were dead. Your parents think you're dead." He flinched at the mention of his parents but didn't respond. Why? The question contained every moment of grief, every tear shed, every night spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if the pain would ever stop. Michael glanced around again, lowered his voice. "This isn't the place, Sarah." "Then where?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Where exactly would be a good place to explain why you let me believe you were dead, while you were here building a whole new life? Where would be appropriate for that conversation, Michael?" People at nearby tables were beginning to notice, to turn and stare. Michael's expression hardened. "If you want answers," he said quietly, "you'll need to be more discreet. I have a life here, people who depend on me." The audacity of his concern for his new life's stability pushed Sarah from shock to rage. "You had people who depended on you before," she hissed. "A wife who loved you. Parents who still cry on your birthday." Pain flickered across his face, quickly suppressed. "Meet me tomorrow," he said, writing on a napkin and sliding it across the table. 3 o'clock. We can talk privately there." Sarah glanced at the napkin, an address in what appeared to be an industrial area. "Why would I go anywhere with you?" "Because you want answers," he said simply, "and I'm the only one who has them." She studied his face, searching for any trace of the man she had married. There were glimpses, the determined set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, but they belonged to a stranger now, someone capable of cruelty she hadn't believed possible. "Tomorrow," she agreed finally, standing, "but I won't be coming alone." Something flashed in Michael's eyes, alarm, quickly concealed. "That's not a good idea." "Neither was faking your death," Sarah countered, "but we all make choices, don't we?" She left without waiting for his response, crossing the street to where Jason waited anxiously. Her legs carried her automatically, though they felt disconnected from her body. The world had taken on a surreal quality, colors too bright, sounds too sharp. "Sarah?" Jason stood as she approached, his face etched with concern. "What happened? Did you speak to him?" She nodded, unable to find words that could possibly convey what had just transpired. Jason guided her to a chair, ordered water, waited patiently until she could speak. "He's meeting us tomorrow," she said finally, showing him the napkin with the address. "He says he'll explain everything." Jason studied the address, frowning. "This is in the port area. Warehouses mostly." "Why there?" Sarah shook her head. She had wondered the same thing. Why not his office, or a public place? But Michael, David, had always had reasons for everything he did, always worked with plans within plans. "We'll be careful," she said, "but I need to hear what he has to say." Jason nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "We should have the car ready, just in case. And I'm staying with you the entire time." Sarah agreed, grateful for his protective instinct, even as she wondered what exactly they needed protection from. Michael hadn't seemed threatening, just cold, calculating. A man interrupted in the middle of a life he had carefully constructed, already formulating how to minimize the damage. Back at the hotel, Sarah paced the room while Jason made arrangements for the next day, renting a car, researching the location, ensuring they had multiple exit routes if needed. His military background asserted itself in crisis, focusing on logistics and contingencies. Sarah's mind, meanwhile, raced with questions that had no answers yet. How had Michael orchestrated his death? Who had helped him? What about the supposed witnesses to the explosion that had allegedly killed him? How many lies had been told? How many people involved in the deception? And beneath these practical questions lay deeper, more painful ones. Had he ever loved her at all? Had their entire relationship been a lie, or had it simply become inconvenient? How could someone she had known so intimately, or thought she had, be capable of such calculated cruelty? That night, Sarah barely slept, her mind replaying the brief encounter in the restaurant. Michael's face when he first saw her. Shock, yes, but not as much as she might have expected. Almost as if, on some level, he had been waiting for this moment, had prepared for it. By morning, shock had hardened into determination. Whatever Michael's explanation, whatever justification he offered, she deserved to hear it. 8 years of grief had earned her that much at least. They arrived at the address 30 minutes early, parking where they could observe the entrance to what appeared to be a small warehouse. The area was industrial but not abandoned. Other businesses operated nearby, workers occasionally passing on the street. Not entirely isolated, but private enough for a conversation that couldn't happen in public. At precisely 3 o'clock, a dark sedan pulled up to the warehouse. Michael emerged from the passenger side, spoke briefly to the driver, then approached the entrance, unlocking it with a key. He glanced once in their direction before disappearing inside. "Ready?" Jason asked, his hand covering hers. Sarah nodded, though ready was the last thing she felt. They approached the warehouse together, alert for anything unusual. The metal door was unlocked as promised, opening to reveal a large space filled with shipping containers and pallets of goods. Office equipment, from what Sarah could see. Computers still in boxes, office furniture wrapped in plastic. Michael stood in the center of the room, hands in his pockets, watching them enter. He looked different than he had yesterday, more guarded, more formal, in a full suit, despite the warehouse setting. His eyes flickered to Jason with obvious displeasure. "I asked you to come alone," he said to Sarah. "And I told you I wouldn't," she replied, moving forward with Jason at her side. "This is Jason. He's here to support me." Michael assessed Jason quickly, noting his military bearing, the protective way he positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah. "You've moved on," he said, an odd note in his voice. "Good. That's good." "Don't," Sarah said sharply. "Don't pretend you care about my well-being. Not after what you did." Michael sighed, gesturing to a small seating area set up near one wall. A desk and several chairs, incongruous in the industrial setting. "We might as well be comfortable. This could take a while." They sat, an absurd parody of a business meeting. 3 people perched on office chairs in a warehouse, tension crackling between them. "Start at the beginning," Sarah said, "and don't lie to me. Not again." Michael studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "The beginning," he echoed. "I suppose that would be when I realized I couldn't live the life we had built anymore." The words struck Sarah like physical blows. "What was wrong with our life?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," he said quickly. "That's what made it so difficult. There was nothing wrong with you, with our marriage. It was me. I felt trapped, suffocated by expectations. My parents, yours, my own. The trajectory was set. Career advancement, bigger house, children growing old together, all the things I thought I wanted. And instead of talking to me about it, instead of asking for a divorce like a normal person, you decided to die." The incredulity in her voice matched the disbelief she still felt, even sitting across from living proof. Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. "A divorce wouldn't have solved the problem, Sarah. I needed to disappear completely, to start fresh without any connections to my past. I needed freedom that couldn't exist as long as Michael Harrington existed." "So you killed him," Sarah said flatly, "and everyone who loved him suffered." He flinched but didn't deny it. "I know how it sounds. I know the pain I caused, but at the time it seemed like the only way." "Tell me how you did it," Jason interjected, his voice hard. "The logistics. Who helped you?" Michael assessed Jason again, seeming to recognize a similar military background. "It wasn't that difficult, actually. The chaos of war provides opportunities. I made connections, paid people who specialize in helping others disappear. New identity, new documentation. The explosion that supposedly killed me was real. Another soldier died. I just wasn't there. Someone altered reports, reclassified remains. These things happen in war more often than anyone admits. The casual way he described corrupting the very system he had ostensibly joined to serve made Sarah's stomach turn. You used another soldier's death as your cover? At least he had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, not my proudest moment. But he was already dead, Sarah. I didn't cause that. And afterwards, she pressed, the bank accounts I found, the money that disappeared, transferred through various channels, eventually making its way here. I had been planning for months before deploying. The enlistment itself was part of the plan. It provided the perfect opportunity, the perfect cover story. Sarah struggled to process the level of premeditation, the months of deception while he had held her, told her he loved her, promised to return to her. All while I thought you were serving your country, you were plotting to abandon me. I never wanted to hurt you, he insisted. I genuinely thought you would mourn and then move on, build a new life, be happy. While you built your new life here, Jason said, his tone making it clear what he thought of Michael's choices. New name, new wife, new family. Michael's expression hardened. Yes, I found something here I never had before, real freedom, a chance to define myself on my own terms. Elena knows nothing about my past. The children, his voice softened when mentioning them. They're innocent in all this. And now, Sarah asked, now that I know you're alive, that everything was a lie. Michael leaned forward, suddenly intense. That's why I agreed to meet you, to ask, to beg, if necessary, that you let me keep this life. My children don't deserve to lose their father. To learn their entire reality is built on deception. The audacity of his request left Sarah speechless. After 8 years of grief based on his lies, he was asking her to maintain those lies, to protect a life he had built on her pain. You want me to just walk away? She finally managed. Pretend I never found you? Continue letting your parents believe they lost their only child? Mom and Dad, he said, and for the first time, real emotion cracked his composed facade. That's the hardest part. I didn't think through what it would do to them. But you did it anyway, Sarah said. And now you want me to continue the deception to protect you from the consequences. Michael spread his hands, a pleading gesture. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm thinking of my children, Sarah. They're 6 and 4. They believe their father is David Torres. Learning who I really am, what I did, it would destroy their world. Sarah stood abruptly, unable to remain seated across from him any longer. You should have thought of that before building a life on lies, she said, moving away from the seating area to gather her thoughts. Jason remained seated, watching Michael with the steady gaze of someone assessing a potential threat. There's the legal aspect as well, he said. Insurance fraud for one, false reports to the military, identity theft. Michael nodded grimly. I'm aware of the potential charges. That's partly why I settled here. Uruguay has limited extradition with the US, and especially for financial crimes. Of course he had thought of that, Sarah realized. Michael had always been meticulous, had always planned 10 steps ahead. His apparent emotion when mentioning his parents might have been genuine, but it hadn't stopped him from executing his plan. She turned back to face him. Show me, she said. Michael frowned. Show you what? Your life, your family, the existence that was worth destroying me for. His expression grew wary. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't particularly care what you think is a good idea, Sarah replied. You've had 8 years of freedom built on my pain. You owe me this much at least. Michael glanced at Jason, then back to Sarah. And after, what will you do with the information? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. What would she do? Report him to authorities? Tell his new wife? Inform his parents that their grief had been unnecessary? I don't know yet, she answered honestly. I need to see everything before I can decide. Michael hesitated, clearly calculating risks and possibilities. Finally, he nodded. Tomorrow, I'll arrange for Elena and the children to visit her mother. I'll show you the house, my business. Then you decide. We'll meet you there, Sarah said, already moving toward the door. She had heard enough for one day, needed time to process what she had learned. As they reached the entrance, Michael called after her. Sarah. She paused but didn't turn. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for the choice I made, but for the pain it caused you. Sarah looked back at him one last time. That's the problem, Michael. It's not worth much at all. Outside, in the harsh sunlight of a Montevideo afternoon, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had happened. Michael was alive, had been alive all this time, building a new family while she grieved for him. The magnitude of the betrayal was almost too large to comprehend. Jason guided her to their rental car, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. You okay? He asked, as they pulled away from the warehouse. Sarah shook her head. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again, she admitted. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about the man I married, it was all a lie. Not everything, Jason said quietly. Your grief was real, your love was real. Don't let him take that from you, too. Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more pieces of the puzzle that was Michael's new life. But for now, she simply needed to breathe, to accept that the ghost she had been chasing all these years was flesh and blood after all, and far more complicated than the heroic memory she had preserved. Would you recognize the person you loved most if you saw them through the lens of betrayal? The address Michael had provided led them to Carrasco, a leafy residential neighborhood with wide streets and elegant homes. His house, David Torres's house, sat on a corner lot surrounded by mature trees and flowering bushes. It was beautiful, Sarah had to admit, the kind of place that appeared in magazines featuring expatriate living. Whitewashed walls, terracotta roof, bougainvillea climbing trellises, a glimpse of a pool in the backyard. Michael waited for them on the front steps, dressed casually in linen pants and a light shirt. He looked like he belonged here, in this setting of tropical affluence. His expression was guarded as they approached, his eyes constantly scanning the street as if watching for threats. Elena took the children to her mother's for the day, he said without preamble. We have until evening. Sarah nodded, suddenly unsure now that the moment had arrived. What did she hope to gain from seeing the physical manifestations of his new life? Would it provide closure or simply deepen the wound? Michael led them inside, moving with the comfortable familiarity of someone truly at home. The interior was open and airy, high ceilings, cool tile floors, large windows that allowed ocean breezes to flow through the space. It was tastefully furnished, clearly expensive but not ostentatious. Family photographs adorned the walls and surfaces. Michael with his new wife, a beautiful woman with warm eyes and a dazzling smile. Michael holding a newborn. The whole family at the beach, at birthday parties, ordinary moments of a life well lived. Sarah moved slowly through the space, absorbing the evidence of Michael's, David's existence here. Children's toys were neatly organized in baskets. A piano stood in one corner, sheet music open on the stand. In the kitchen, artwork was displayed on the refrigerator, childish drawings signed Sophia and Gabriel in wobbly letters. They're beautiful, she said finally, pausing before a photograph of the children. The girl had Michael's eyes, the boy his determined chin. Yes, he agreed softly. They're everything to me. Sarah turned to study him, this man who had once been her husband. Does she know anything? Your wife? Michael shook his head. Eleanor believes I'm Canadian, that my parents died before we met. She knows I was married before, but thinks my ex-wife lives in Vancouver. So your entire relationship with her is based on lies, Sarah observed. Not the important parts, Michael insisted. She knows who I am as a person, as a husband, as a father. The details of my past, where I grew up, where I went to school, those aren't what make a relationship real. Aren't they? Sarah challenged. The shared history, the understanding of where someone comes from, that's fundamental. You've denied her that authenticity. Michael had no answer for that. He led them through the rest of the house, a home office where he managed his business, children's bedrooms filled with toys and books, a master suite with views of the garden. Every space reflected careful curation, a life deliberately constructed. "And your business?" Jason prompted when they had completed the tour of the house. "Import-export, primarily with Asian markets," Michael explained. "Specialized office equipment, some luxury goods. It's profitable, legitimate. I've built something substantial here." "On a foundation of fraud," Jason noted. Michael's expression hardened. "Judge me if you want. I'm not proud of how I got here, but I won't apologize for the life I've built." "Show us the business records," Sarah said suddenly. "I want to see exactly how you transferred our money, how you established yourself here." Michael hesitated, then nodded. "In my office. I'll show you everything." For the next 2 hours, he walked them through the paper trail, offshore accounts, shell companies, the gradual transfer of assets from Michael Harrington to David Torres. The complexity was impressive, the planning meticulous. He had begun preparing almost a year before his death, creating structures that would activate upon news of his demise. "The life insurance?" Sarah asked. It had been a substantial policy, military supplemented. "Diverted," Michael admitted. "Not all of it. I made sure you received enough to be comfortable, but about 60% was rerouted through a series of transactions. It funded the initial business setup here." The casual way he discussed stealing what should have been her financial support after his death made Sarah's anger flare anew. "You decided what portion of my own money I should keep. I needed capital to start over," he said, as if that justified everything. "And I knew you would be okay. You had the house, your teaching job, family support. Did it ever occur to you to just ask for a divorce and split our assets legally?" Jason interjected. "Take your half and leave?" Michael shook his head. "A divorce wouldn't have given me what I needed. There would still be connections, obligations. People would have found me, expected things from me. I needed a complete break." "So complete that you let people who loved you believe you were dead," Sarah said bitterly. "That's not a break, Michael. That's cruelty." He didn't deny it, simply continued showing them documents, business licenses, property deeds, bank statements. The evidence of his new life, meticulously organized and documented. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah felt increasingly disconnected from the proceedings, as though watching from a distance. This man, this house, these files full of numbers and legal entities, they represented a reality so far removed from her 8 years of grief that she could barely reconcile them. "Why did you leave the photograph for me to find?" she asked suddenly, interrupting Michael's explanation of his business structure. "The Polaroid. And the other signs? The credit alert, the strange phone calls. Why risk your perfect new life by reaching out?" Michael stilled, his expression unreadable. "I didn't leave any photograph," he said slowly, "or make calls. I've had no contact with you since I left." Sarah stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception. "Then how did I find you? The Polaroid showed you on a beach here, dated last year. It appeared in my desk drawer, a drawer I use regularly. Someone put it there deliberately." Michael's face drained of color. "Show me," he demanded. Sarah retrieved the photograph from her bag, where she had carried it since its discovery. Michael examined it, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This was taken at Positos Beach, about 15 minutes from here," he said. "During a company event last spring. I remember it because it was Gabriel's birthday the next day. We had the celebration right after this." He pointed to a building partially visible in the background. "That's my office building." "Then you did leave it for me to find," Sarah insisted. "No," Michael said firmly. "I had no reason to contact you, to risk everything I've built here. This makes no sense." "Unless someone else knew your secret," Jason suggested quietly. "Someone who decided it was time for the truth to come out." Michael's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "That's not possible. The only people who knew were those I paid for help with documentation, and they had no connection to you, no way to find you." "What about Tom Campbell?" Sarah asked. "He practically admitted to knowing something when I called him." Michael shook his head. "Tom knew I was unhappy, that I had considered leaving. He didn't know the plan. I never told him where I was going or how I would disappear." "Someone knew," Sarah insisted. "Someone wanted me to find you." The implication hung in the air between them. Michael's carefully constructed life had been compromised, his secret exposed not by his own actions, but by someone else's. "We should go," Michael said abruptly, gathering the documents and returning them to his safe. "Elena will be back with the children soon. I can't risk them seeing you here." Sarah stood, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. "What happens now, Michael, now that I know everything?" He faced her, his expression a complex mix of fear, resignation, and something that might have been regret. "That depends on you," he said simply. "You know my situation, what's at stake for my family. What do you want, Sarah?" It was the first time he had directly asked what she wanted, what she needed. After 8 years of his unilateral decisions affecting her life, the question felt significant. "I want—" Sarah paused, realizing she wasn't entirely sure. Vengeance? Justice? Closure? None seemed quite right. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is a lot to process." Michael nodded, relief flickering briefly across his face at the temporary reprieve. "I understand. But please, Sarah, whatever you decide, remember my children. They're innocent in all this." "Unlike you," Jason said pointedly, placing a protective hand on Sarah's back as they moved toward the door. At the threshold, Sarah turned back one last time, taking in the physical reality of Michael's new life. The beautiful home, the evidence of children and family, the comfort and security he had built for himself while she had struggled through grief and rebuilding. "One more thing," she said. "Your parents, Robert and Eleanor, they've suffered enormously, Michael." Every day for 8 years, pain flashed across his face, perhaps the most genuine emotion she had seen from him. "I know," he said softly. "Do you?" Sarah challenged. "Your father's health has deteriorated. Stress, the doctors say, from unresolved grief. Your mother volunteers at veteran support groups, trying to help others because she couldn't save you. They visit your empty grave every month, not just on anniversaries." Michael looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I can't change the past," he said. "No," Sarah agreed, "none of us can. But you chose this present, Michael. Remember that." They left him standing in the doorway of his beautiful home, the sun beginning to set behind him, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. As Jason drove them back to their hotel, Sarah stared out the window at the unfamiliar city that had been Michael's refuge all these years. "What are you thinking?" Jason asked gently, when the silence had stretched for miles. Sarah turned from the window to look at him. This man who had stood beside her through her darkest moments, who had accompanied her across oceans to confront her past, who had never once asked her to be anything other than what she was. "I'm thinking about truth," she said, "about how it can destroy and heal at the same time." Jason nodded, understanding without further explanation. "Whatever you decide," he promised, "I'm with you." Back at the hotel, Sarah asked for time alone. She stood on the balcony overlooking the city, watching lights come on as evening descended, imagining Michael, David, returning home, greeting his unsuspecting wife and children, perhaps holding them a little tighter tonight, knowing his carefully constructed world hung in the balance. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 8 years, she had lived with the devastating consequences of Michael's choice, while he had thrived in his new identity. Now, with a single decision, she held the power to upend his reality as completely as he had once destroyed hers. Justice demanded exposure. The authorities should know about the insurance fraud, the identity theft, the corruption of military protocols. Elena deserved to know she had built a life with a man whose very existence was a fabrication. Robert and Eleanor deserved to know their son was alive, and yet exposure would hurt innocence too. Two children would lose the father they knew, would have their sense of security and trust permanently damaged. Elena would face the collapse of her marriage and family identity simultaneously. Sarah had experienced firsthand the devastation of having one's reality suddenly revealed as fiction. Could she knowingly inflict that pain on others, even to right a profound wrong? As night fell over Montevideo, Sarah made her decision. Whatever path she chose would be irreversible, would set in motion consequences that would ripple through multiple lives. The responsibility weighed heavily, but after 8 years of being acted upon by Michael's choices, it was time for her to act with full agency and awareness. When truth and mercy stand in opposition, which would you choose? The box arrived on the 10th anniversary of Michael's death. No return address, postmarked from Uruguay. Inside, his wedding ring and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry. Let me go." Sarah stood in the bedroom she had once shared with Michael, holding the evidence of his final communication. 1 year had passed since her confrontation with him in Montevideo, 1 year of silence as she processed what she had learned and determined how to proceed. In the end, her decision had been both simpler and more complex than she had anticipated. She had returned from Uruguay and gone directly to Michael's parents, showing them the photographs, explaining everything she had discovered. Their reactions had been as devastating as she had feared. Eleanor's wail of anguish, Robert's military posture finally breaking as he collapsed into a chair, both of them crushed anew by a different kind of loss. "What will you do?" Eleanor had asked when the initial shock had passed, her voice small and uncertain. "That depends on what you want," Sarah had replied, recognizing that they too deserved agency in this decision. After long discussion, they had reached a painful consensus. They would not pursue legal action against their son. The price of justice, public exposure, legal proceedings, potential imprisonment was too high, especially considering the impact on innocent children. Michael, or David, as he now was, would face no official consequences for his deception. But there would be private reckoning. Sarah had written to him at a secure email address he had provided, outlining their decision. No authorities would be informed, no legal action taken. But in exchange for this mercy, he would send his parents proof of life each year, photographs, letters, news of their grandchildren they would never meet. He would establish a trust fund for his parents' care as they aged, managed anonymously through Sarah. And he would formally relinquish any claim to the life and identity of Michael Harrington, signing legal documents Sarah had drawn up with the help of an attorney who believed they were handling a complex divorce. The package before her now confirmed his acceptance of these terms. His wedding ring returned as symbolic severance, his note both acknowledgement and plea. Sarah picked up the ring, feeling its weight one last time, before placing it in a small wooden box, where she kept the few mementos of her life. With Michael, she had chosen to retain. His parents had requested most photographs and personal items, creating their own private memorial to a son who now existed only in memory, despite still walking the earth. The truth unraveled quickly after Sarah's return. Financial investigations revealed funds had been siphoned from their joint accounts in the months before his deployment. Tom Campbell, confronted directly, finally confessed to helping Michael create new identification, to being aware of the planned disappearance that the war would conveniently explain, though he claimed not to know details of Michael's current location. There had been no explosion that claimed Michael specifically, no heroic last stand. Just a man who wanted a different life and saw an opportunity in chaos. The question of who had left the Polaroid for Sarah to find remained unanswered. Tom denied involvement, Meredith Chen had theories but no concrete evidence. It remained a mystery, a random act of exposure that had changed the course of multiple lives. Sarah moved through her house, no longer their house, firmly and solely hers now, gathering the last items she would take to her new home. After 10 years in this space, filled first with grief and then with painful knowledge, she was finally leaving, starting fresh just as Michael had done a decade earlier. Jason waited in the living room, patient and steady as always. Their relationship had weathered the storm of Sarah's discovery, had grown stronger through the painful process of confronting Michael and deciding how to proceed. Jason had supported her choices without pushing his own agenda, had given her space to process her complex emotions without withdrawing his presence. 6 months ago he had proposed, not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday evening as they cooked dinner together. Sarah had said yes without hesitation, certain in a way she had never been with Michael. This love, built on shared experience and mutual support, felt solid beneath her feet. They would marry in the spring, a small ceremony with close friends and family. Eleanor and Robert would attend. They had become an important part of Sarah's life, bound to her not by legal ties, but by shared grief and healing. The three of them had found a way forward together, supporting each other through the complex emotions of mourning someone who wasn't actually dead. "Ready?" Jason asked as Sarah returned to the living room, the final box of belongings in her arms. She looked around the empty space, walls bare where photographs had hung, furniture already moved to their new home, the physical evidence of her life with Michael erased. But the memories remained, both painful and precious, part of the tapestry of her existence. "Yes," she said, meaning it completely for perhaps the first time in 10 years. "I'm ready." Outside, she locked the door for the final time, placed the key under the mat for the new owners who would arrive tomorrow. As they walked to the car, Sarah felt the weight of the past decade, grief, discovery, decision, resolution, settling into its proper place within her. Not forgotten, not dominating, simply incorporated into the person she had become. Michael had chosen escape, had built a new life by destroying his old one. Sarah had chosen a different path, integration, healing, moving forward without erasing what came before. Their choices reflected their true selves, perhaps the most honest expressions of who they had always been. As they drove away from the house, Sarah thought briefly of Michael in his Uruguayan home, with his children, who were now 7 and 5, living his chosen life. She felt no anger anymore, no desire for retribution. What remained was a complex mix of sadness for what might have been and acceptance of what was. There was no going back for either of them. The past was immutable, the future unwritten. All any of them could do was move forward with the truth they now possessed, making peace with decisions that couldn't be undone. Sarah reached for Jason's hand as they drove toward their new home, their shared future. The ring he had given her caught the light, not a replacement for what she had lost, but something entirely new, representing possibilities rather than memories. Some secrets are meant to be revealed, even when the revelation comes too late to change the past. But perhaps, Sarah reflected, the truth had arrived at exactly the right moment to shape her future. Not the future she had once imagined with Michael, but one she was now choosing for herself, with full awareness and open eyes. Everything had already been written, not by fate or destiny, but by choices, Michael's, hers, those of everyone involved in their intertwined stories. The final chapters remained to be composed, day by day, decision by decision. Sarah turned her face toward the road ahead, ready at last to write her own ending. Have you ever discovered that your greatest pain was built on lies? Would you chase justice or closure? Would you reach across oceans to confront the architect of your suffering, or would you finally set yourself free? If this story resonates with you, if you've ever questioned the nature of loss or betrayal, Share your thoughts in the comments. Some wounds never fully heal, but sharing them might help others feel less alone in their own painful truths. Would you have made the same choice as Sarah, choosing mercy over justice, closure over vengeance? Or would you have exposed the elaborate deception, regardless of the collateral damage? We all carry private tragedies, moments that divide our lives into before and after. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't confronting the person who hurt you, but choosing to release the hold they have on your future. Subscribe to hear more hidden truths that lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives. Stories of disappearances, betrayals, and revelations that come too late to change the past, but just in time to transform the future. Because some secrets are meant to be revealed, even when the revelation comes too late. It was too late now. But it's never too late to reclaim your story.